Chapter 1. Now Roddy, it's not like you to be so glum. Cheer up. I'm sure you're going to love her. Bloody doubtful. Roderick Chase, never Roddy. Thank you very much, wrinkled his nose and growled under his breath, first at his Aunt Letitia's never-ending perkiness, then at his first good whiff of America. Granted, London's air was no fresh spring bouquet much of the time, but this, even for an airport, it made his eyes water, and he'd thought himself inured to the stench of monkey. He didn't even try to muffle his sneeze. I don't suppose she lives in the country, he muttered. She lives with her family in Fairmount Park, but she's getting an apartment soon. Roderick's nose wrinkled further. Aunt Letty fixed a scowl on him. Don't you make that face at me. Your mother went to a lot of trouble to arrange this meet. Ah yes, always on the lookout for her favorite son's best interests. Yes, Aunt Letty said shortly, she is. New blood's always good for the pack. And it's long past time you were properly mated. I'm quite capable of finding my own mate, you know. Oh, we know. Found yourself a dozen in the last 6 months, I've been told. Usually in pubs. Human pubs. I thought you just said new blood's good for the pack. That depends on the blood, and you know it. She took his arm to haul him off to baggage claim, weaving them expertly through the mass of ill-smelling umans. Your mother wants you mated and settled. The sooner the better, I say. And we all jump when the Queen Mum yips, which wasn't so far off the mark. He was forced to bitterly concede. His mother, Bernadette Chase, had ruled the pack with an iron paw since well before the death of his father. No one, not even Roderick, dared raise hackles in front of her. Playing the happy submissive had grown more difficult over the last several years. Rank as this Yank air was, he found it easier to breathe than the close, tension-filled atmosphere of Chase Manor, although he felt it could do with a lot less monkey whiff. A fat ape in a straining business suit nearly ran him down in his desperate lumber toward the boarding gate. Roderick didn't know whether to snarl or shudder. So what am I supposed to do with this bitch? Submit to the whole arranged mating, or just get a litter on her? You watch your tone, puppy. I'm not afraid to nip you in public. Aunt Letty flashed a fong to show she meant it. Coraline comes from a fine old pack. Impeccable pedigree. No human blood in her veins. She sounds delightful. Perhaps we ought to show her at Crufts. Aunt Letty reached up and cuffed him on the scruff of the neck. There'll be no more of that talk. You'll marry this girl and there's the end of it. She stared about, her nose working as hard as her eyes. Oh dear, where's Eugene? Got to? He should have joined us by now. Ah well, let's go fetch your bags. She snatched his claim ticket out of his hand and trotted toward the carousel. Roderick lagged behind. Inside his expensive, restrictive suit he was seething. An arranged marriage. In this day and age. With some Yank no less. Like he and bite it, who did they think they were dealing with? He was alpha. But so was his mother, and some alphas were more alpha than others, as his sister Tamara was fond of reminding him. One did not defy one's pack leader, unless one was prepared to face the consequences. Generated by ABC Amber Lit. http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html. Possible death being foremost, which is how he'd come to stand alone in a crowded airport, hemmed in by monkeys and their noxious stench in bloody Philadelphia. Why couldn't his mother have found him a she in a more civilized country? This is punishment, he decided. Her way of forcing him to show throat. All right, perhaps he deserved a cuff or two. He liked his romps. He'd never tried to hide the fact. However, he'd been discreet. No lovers sent to hospital, no half-human whelps left behind, no cries of werewolf to come back and haunt the pack. If the girls themselves didn't object, and none had to date, then where was the harm? Better a human she than some protected daughter of the pack. The monkeys howled just as loudly and enthusiastically as any were. Or perhaps the Queen Mum expected her get to stay celibate? He shuddered and growled at the thought. Well, Bernadette Chase was back home in England, and Aunt Letty was verbally tearing out the throat of the hapless baggage clerk, and Cousin Eugene had yet to return, so there was no one to stop him from visually feasting on the bounty laid out before him. Say what you would about humans, they bred themselves some fine, attractive. She's even here in the colonies. Like that one in the flowered scarf with legs longer than the Amazon, or the blonde at the ticket counter who kept flicking glances his way, or the redhead alone in the seating area, perched on the edge of her plastic chair, who had placed a shallow clay bowl in her lap, and was currently starting a fire in it. Roderick blinked and narrowed his eyes. She wasn't actually. Yes, she was actually. The redhead had taken a white stump of candle out of a shapeless knit shoulder bag big enough to hold India. She murmured to the candle and it burst into flame. With this she lit the scrap of parchment she'd placed in the bowl. A little wisp of purplish smoke spiraled up. She bent low over the bowl. He saw her lips move. Now monkeys, the Yank breed especially, had been known to do some pretty queer things, but this was new even to Roderick. Intrigued, he ambled over for a closer look. He crept up behind her on silent hunter's feet. His keen ears picked up an unfamiliar language, similar to Gaelic but oddly accented. He risked a final closer step and walked right into the scent of the smoke. It wasn't at all the type of odor he associated with burning paper. Tartan. Sweet at once, it conjured up images of thick, dark forests, a belly full of fresh-killed venison and, inexplicably, the color violet. Suddenly he felt invincible, as if nothing on earth could do him harm. All this lasted only a second. Then the woman blew a kiss into the fire, murmured, "Be safe," and snuffed the flame. The smoke billowed up in a final burst straight up his sensitive nose. He couldn't stop his sneeze. The woman gasped and nearly dropped her bowl. She twisted around in her seat. The most striking cobalt eyes he'd ever gazed into widened at him. Her full and perfect lips formed a full and perfect O. Would those eyes darken during love, he wondered? What cries would she make? What cries would he make in response when those long-fingered delicate hands took their wicked liberties with his flesh? His fantasy spoke in low, husky tones. "Oh geez, I'm not a terrorist. Honest." The left side of his mouth quirked upward. "Of course not." He nodded at the bowl and its smoldering contents. "So why dispose of the evidence?" "It's not evidence of anything. It's a..." She cut herself off. Her eyes got thin, so they could darken. "Fascinating. You're not airport security." "No," he admitted with a graceful shrug. "Merely a concerned citizen." His first concern at this point was how best to bring down this delectable prey. This involuntary trip across the pond had just become infinitely more interesting. Concerned citizen, Dorinda thought. Yeah, right. And she was Morgane Le Fay. He wasn't even an American citizen either, if that accent was for real. She gave him the automatic once-over. His suit did nothing to disguise a trim, athletic build. His face sported a long nose, square, powerful jaw and hair, as black as Scranton coal and thick as an animal's pelt. It went well with his tawny eyes. An alarm went off in the back of her head. What did she know about yellow eyes? "You're not from around here," she said. "Just get in." 20 minutes ago. He glanced around quickly, as if checking for someone. Dorinda started to rise. Instantly he moved around the seat to offer his hand. Roderick Chase. London, England. Dorinda Lowell. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She didn't take his hand. Instead she peered at it as if passing judgment. He beamed his most disarming smile at her. "I assure you I don't bite. Not right off." Still skeptical, she shifted the bag and the bowl into her left hand and extended her right. She accepted Roderick's hand and rose gracefully to her feet. And the world slid sideways. Oh crap. Her truth touch had just kicked in on her again. Mr. Merry Old throbbed with primal predatory power, more than ready and willing to claim all within his line of sight, like her for instance. She knew in her head she was holding his hand, but her eyes saw a paw in her palm. Looking up, she found herself eye to yellow eye with a great black wolf in a suit. His muzzle twitched, and he cocked his head slightly to one side. His jaws parted. "Is something the matter?" the wolf said. Dorinda snatched her hand away. The wolf snapped back to human. "Her bag slid" off her shoulder and nearly knocked the bowl from her hand. And frantically transferring the bowl from left hand to right, she lost her grip on the shoulder bag. It dropped off her forearm and plopped at her feet. Small plastic vials, a lipstick, a handful of business cards and a John Grisham paperback scattered across the floor. Roderick stared at her, puzzled. Dorinda backed a step, placing the bag between them. The yellow eyes made sense now. You're a werewolf, she blurted. His nostrils flared. Hecadesbra, he was actually sniffing her. You're a witch. Yes, she said proudly and waited for the look. Raised brows, pursed lips. Naked skepticism. Dropping the W-bomb on strangers usually provoked that reaction. Instead, this intercontinental were merely shrugged broad shoulders. I suppose. That explains the bonfire. Oh, right. She secured her grip on the bowl. Protection spell. My brother's plane just took off. I wanted to make sure he gets home safely. Not easy casting spells in a public place these days. They think you're trying to burn the building down. You're taking all this rather well. You're being a witch? We do have them in England, you know. Old hags mostly. Not young and lovely. You don't object to my being a wer. I've dealt with my share of wolves. Maybe not as smooth as this one, but with intentions just as transparent. She cut eye contact and knelt to clean up the spill from her bag. Instantly he crouched to assist her. So what brings you to Philadelphia? Nothing important. He reached for a vial. She swept it deftly out of his, reaching back into her bag. Their fingers nearly brushed. She skillfully avoided that as well. Don't touch the vials, she warned. They're not for amateurs. What's in them? Herbs mostly. I don't want to get them mixed up. Some of the combinations can be volatile. She groped for the business cards. He helped her gather them up. He paused to examine one. Set a spell, South Street. You're the shop's resident witch. And the owner. She grabbed the card from him. Not quickly enough. This time, their fingers did touch. The wolf popped into existence again. His interest blatantly sexual. Her body responded with a shiver of reciprocation. Bad body, Dorinda scolded it. Lusting after a werewolf, even a sexy British one, was not in the cards for a witch. Talk about your volatile combinations. I'd love to see your establishment, he said. And the rest of your lovely city. Perhaps you'd consent to show me around. He wasn't quite panting, and neither was she, but if he kept inching closer to her, that would change in seconds. Get on to another subject fast. Does Big Alex know you're in town? He paused in his relentless inching. Who? Big Alex. The King Wolf of Philadelphia. No outsider sets a paw on his turf unless he okays it first. She put some frost in her voice. We don't want any trouble here. If he hasn't given permission, arrangements were made on my behalf. I'm to stay with the local branch of our pack. I'm sure your Big Alex has been properly alerted. Got family in the city then? Whereabouts? He growled under his breath. Bite it, Aunt Letty's mentioned it a million times. Fairlane Park? Something like that. Fairmount Park. Yes, that's it. She'd scooped the last of the spillage into her bag and was about to rise. He cupped her elbow and helped her to her feet. He barely stopped himself from licking his lips. The house is called Meadowlands. I'm sure I can arrange a visit for you. That won't be necessary. If you have family here, they can show you around, so you won't be needing my services. She smiled at the same time stepping just beyond his reach. I've got to get back to work. Enjoy your stay in America, Mr. Chase. She turned her back on him and walked away at a brisk stride that shouted, Finality. That's for you, Mr. English werewolf, she thought. If you have any sense, you'll let it drop. She increased her pace to a trot and marked the nearest exits. Not that she was worried, of course, just to be on the safe side. Roderick growled again, this time low down in his throat and with a fierce smile framing it. This Yank monkey, she stirred his blood as well as his hunting instincts. He would give her just enough of a lead, then run her down. And there you are. Aunt Letty bustled up with Cousin Eugene in tow. She thrust a leather suitcase at him while Eugene shrugged apologetic welcome. Here's the one. The other's on its way to Istanbul. Those primates at the desk act like it's nothing. I'll nothing them, the chattering. She broke off and sniffed. Her expression darkened further. Roddy, have you been after the she's again? Of course not. Roderick rolled his eyes at Eugene, the picture of innocence. Then yelped when Aunt Letty cuffed him. What was that for? For thinking you can lie to me. I've got a nose puppy. Shame on you. She cuffed him again. Barely off the plane and already hunting a romp. Daddy was right to get you mated off. If you thought with your brain instead of your nether bits, you wouldn't get in half so much mischief. From here on you'd better be on your best behavior, or else I'll put you on a leash. She will too, Eugene said, with a choke collar. He rubbed his neck as if at unpleasant memories. Can we go? It stinks in here. In a minute, dear. Roddy has to go through customs. Assuming the simians. Don't muck that up too. Come along, Roddy. Stay close. She headed off. Roderick followed meekly. Now was not the time to bristle and bare teeth. Growing up under Bernadette's reign had taught him when to show throat and when to lunge for it. Eugene slip generated by ABC Amber Lit. http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html into formation at his back, cutting off escape. Neither could stop Roderick from looking around. The witch could not have gotten far, not in a crowd this packed. Ah, there she was along the wall, emptying the ashy contents of her bowl into a dustbin. That hair drew all eyes to her even in a mob this size. A rich, thick pelt, perfect for burrowing fingers in. As if aware of his regard, she suddenly looked up. Her stare was drawn to him, like a compass needle to the pole. He grinned at her and winked. She couldn't possibly have seen either gesture, not at that distance, yet her posture stiffened. She turned abruptly and marched away, toward the distant exit. The lesser apes scurried out of her way, as they would before any alpha. Forget the monkeys, Eugene was saying. You want fun, I know where to find. Fun? There's this place on Arch Street, Lade Vamps, but they won't bother us. We can. Roderick let him blather on without paying any attention. He smiled to himself and slid his hand into his trousers pocket. His fingers curved around the business card he'd palmed while helping the witch gather her potions. The pad of his thumb rubbed along the embossed letters of her name, as it would soon rub the creamy richness of her skin. One did not escape a wolf so easily, not even a witch. His smile broadened until fangs showed. Perhaps this trip to the colonies would turn out well for him after all. Chapter 2. Springsteen set a spell's resident cat acknowledged Dorinda's return with a muffled roar that quickly spread into a yawn. Her assistant, Perry Gilmore, displayed far more animation. Hey, that was quick. Paul, get off, okay? Things have been like dead in here since lunchtime. I really think we should put that witch mannequin back out front. You know, the one from Halloween? The tourists love it. They take pictures all the time. Sure, okay. But put it closer to the window instead of the door this time. That way they get the name of the store and the website in the shot. Maybe Great Aunt Tilly in Chester County would want to shop online. Dorinda spoke without breaking stride. She aimed for the office and back in the Rolodex. Do we still have the Wolf King's phone number? Big Alex? Yeah, I think. Look under B. Does he even have a last name? Here he is. Alexander Vittori. Filed under W, presumably for Wolf. Perry. And the alphabet had only a nodding acquaintance. She punched in the first for numbers on her cell, then stopped because Perry was parked in the office doorway, peering at her suspiciously out of her huge thistledown eyes. What? What? She says. You take your brother to the airport, then blast back in here and get on the phone to Philadelphia's head werewolf. Where, I ask myself, is the connection? Dorinda sighed and related the Cliff's Notes version of her brief encounter with Roderick Chase. She deliberately left all the meat off the bones. His piercing yellow eyes, his deep voice, the fact he openly wanted her and she'd been teetering on the verge of wanting back. She did let slip he was English, and regretted it instantly when Perry out. Did he have an accent? Lieu of the accent. Perry, he's a werewolf. So a werewolf's not allowed to have an accent? Goddess help them both. Yes, he had an accent. Kind of Patrick Stewartish. But growly. And yes, before you ask, he had a lot more hair. As a matter of fact, he was quite the hunk. Oh. Perry melted right there in the doorway. Dorinda bit down on a snort. Perry was only 21 and still an apprentice witch. She had blonde hair, cut in a pixie dew and pixie blood as well. She could be forgiven a melt now. And then even won over a whir. Dorinda, on the other hand, was 5 years older and a full enchantress, and fully committed to the solitude she'd decided was a witch's lot in life. Her melting days were well behind her. No. Matter how fascinating she found some Englishmen's. Make that English. Wolf's burning topaz eyes. Dang, I wish you'd gotten his number. So you're calling Big Alex because? Because I need to know if Prince Harry's legit. If he's not, Big Alex needs to hear about him. We can do without an intercontinental pack war. Remember that mess with the vampires? God, yeah. We were weeks cleaning that up. Who knew vampires needed healing? Potions? I thought they just slept all day and woke up whole. Not when you shoot them with slugs dipped in holy water, they don't. I'm more concerned about the mortal reaction. Gang violence is gang violence. That includes pack violence. A couple werewolves snarl at each other, the mortals get antsy, the cops crack down, and everybody suffers. Especially us on the fringe. That's why I'm calling Big Alex. Gotcha. Perry tugged on her lower lip. So, did he tell you what hotel he's staying at? Down, girl. He's staying with family. He mentioned Fairmount Park. I don't remember a chase pack in Fairmount Park. No, that's the Meadows clan. Officer Charlie's pack. I don't recall Charlie saying he had English relatives. If it's true though, and the guy checks out, he's all yours. Yay. Time to stock up on the flea powder. Perry danced back into the storefront. Dorinda shook her head and dialed Big Alex. Perry had customers, two somber teens looking for goth accessories. By the time Dorinda emerged from the office, Perry sold the pair some silver medallions, threw in a free tube of eyeliner, and sent them on their gloomy way. She didn't try to disguise her relief at their departure. God, I hate goths. They suck all the happy out of a room. So what did Big Alex say about my future husband? Turns out he's legit and engaged. He's here to be married. Dorinda leaned on the counter. She felt like something had been siphoned out of her. Where had the disappointment come from? He was just some guy. He wasn't even a human guy. He was a wolf in a pricey suit making predators' eyes at her when he already had a bride waiting. What? That dog. How dare he be taken? Perry stomped over to the windowsill, where Springsteen lounged, and consoled herself by stroking her familiar's fur. I should have figured. You know what they say. The good ones are either married or demons. Forget him, Dorinda said decisively. You're right, he's a dog. He's not worth the time. There are plenty of other hot men with sexy accents out there. But none of them come in here. Maybe if we burn some incense. Dang, now I can't get words out of my head. Do we have any steak flavored pixies? Bright but exhausting. I should go over the inventory, Dorinda said, and beat a strategic retreat. By the time Roderick rose the next morning, Aunt Letty already had his itinerary planned. A quick bite of breakfast, snatch a shower, then off to the one could not stay in Philadelphia, Aunt Letty insisted, without visiting the historic district, as if he gave a twitch of his tail, where a gaggle of ragtag traders had plotted rebellion against their rightful alpha. But then, King George hadn't been any higher up the evolutionary ladder in Roderick's biased opinion. Now if they'd had a true wolf on the throne. Aunt Letty cuffed his neck. Stop eyeing that girl, she hissed under her breath. At least pretend you're paying attention. He stifled his sigh, held his tongue, and wrenched his stare off the apes in the clingy skirt. Aunt Letty meant well, like he, and bless her. She knew this situation was difficult for him, and was doing all she knew to ease it. So he subjected himself to the park ranger's drone and joined the monkeys and undue over the Liberty Bell. Bloody thing's got a crack in it, he thought sourly, which pretty much summed up his life. He knew himself to be a highly desirable catch, attractive to she-wolves and monkeys alike, from a wealthy and well-established pack. But the situation had become intolerable. He was nearly 30. How was he to advance with the Queen Mum's paw on his neck and no intention of removing it? Pack life did not foster alpha males, as there could only be one. Alphas had to make their own way, groom their own family of followers. For that he would need a mate as strong and aggressive as he, but a mate of his choosing in his own time, not just because his mother said so. How big of a tucktail did she think him? Or he could split from the pack and run lone, which meant a slow, excruciating death sentence to the social worse. Or he dipped his hand into his trousers pocket and patted the business card. In his other hand he carried the street map they'd been handing out at the visitors' center. The flirty brunette in faux colonial garb had happily pointed out South Street, only 5 blocks from his current location. All he need do was slip Aunt Letty's leash. Aunt Letty's hand clamped on his forearm. Oh, this is a stroke of luck. She dragged him away from the clustered monkeys toward a trim older woman in a tailored suit. Nora dear, what a delight to see you. The woman's head turned toward them. Her nose worked and her air of aloof condescension dissipated like mist. She smiled at them, displaying healthy teeth. Letitia, what a pleasant surprise. They greeted each other with a quick, rough hug that would have left bruises on an ape. Her eyes, a striking gold, fastened on him like the jaws of a trap. This has to be Roderick. None other, Aunt Letitia said proudly. Roddy dear, this is Nora Duquesne, Coraline's mother. He smiled and politely inclined his head. Surprise, my hairy arse. They'd planned this. Provide the buyer with a preview of the merchandise. Was everywhere she on the planet conspiring against him? Fortunately, she restrained herself and settled for a visual appraisal. Time get to know a place. He hoped she'd take the hint, but no such luck. I was supposed to meet. Too bad, she's so eager to meet you. Unless Coraline can get to know each other, and you and I can catch up. It's been too long since our packs intermingled. We should firm up the ties again. I'm sure I'll adore her. Chatting with each other and, for the moment, forgot him. He stood by. To the rear. Then another. Seconds later he slipped himself in with a nod of minutes he'd covered a block, and Aunt Letty was nowhere in sight. Leisurely trot. Let the hunt. Chapter 3. Dorinda tapped her frowning lips with the edge of the 10 of diamonds. This wasn't looking good at all. Irritated, she gathered up the cards on the counter, patted them back into the deck and shuffled. Before she dealt, she took a set of long, slow cleansing breaths. It might not be fate that had soured the cards. It might well be her own mood. Business crawled along this morning. No big surprise. Her customers rarely got out of bed before noon or, in a lot of cases, sundown. To pass the time, she'd pulled out the deck of cards she used to tell fortunes. Instead of sensibly dealing herself a hand of solitaire, she'd gone for a personal reading. Hadn't been encouraging. Neither had the two that followed. Well, try again. She cut the deck, dealt from the top, and was not surprised when the Queen of Hearts led off. The Queen was her personal card. Next came a string of hearts and diamonds that took up half the circular deal. That string had prompted her initial frown. Hearts meant love, diamonds a binding chain. Fate meant to bind her to someone. Dorinda sniffed. She wasn't into bondage. She shuffled the deck again. Breach of convention she hoped would negate the repetitive reading. No luck. The Jack of Clubs appeared, just as it had before. The Jack of Clubs always meant trouble. A line of clubs followed, broken here and there by hearts. Love persisted, but it would be a bumpy ride. Then the final 3. First the Ace of Spades. Dorinda's mouth tightened. Didn't always have to mean death. Could just stand for radical change. The Ace of Hearts couldn't be as easily shrugged off. When taken in context with the rest of the reading, it could only mean love triumphant, though heavily influenced by the Black Ace. Something was going to change or die, either the love itself or one of the lovers. One of which, according to the reading, was her. Not likely. She deliberately gave the deck yet another forbidden shuffle. Let's see you come up this time. The King of Spades appeared at the top of the deck, just like the last 3 times. It sat expectantly in her palm, waiting for her to place it next to the Queen of Hearts. Instead she scraped up the cards with a snarl and swept the deck into the shoebox underneath the counter. These benighted readings were never accurate anyway. Morosely she stared out the window at the passing foot traffic on South Street. Maybe it was just her imagination, but there seemed to be an awful lot of cuddling couples out there this morning. Young, not so young, in business suits and battered jeans and studded leather vests, men and women, boys and girls, a couple same-sex pairings. All of them looked disgustingly happy. Hecata's tits, it wasn't even that far into spring. April had barely got its feet wet on the calendar. In the long run, though, the time of year didn't really matter. The whole young man's or young woman's fancy cliché had never applied to her. I'm a witch, she told herself. Witches were strong, independent, self-reliant. They didn't need men to feel complete. A lucky thing, since her witchiness usually scared the bejeebers out of any male she tried to date. Just mention witch and watch the eyebrows climb. Then she felt compelled to demonstrate That brought on the sweat popping out on palms and cheeks, the stammered excuses and apologies for suddenly having to be elsewhere. A step up from pitchforks, torches and nooses, though not much of one. Pity about the whir. He hadn't been put off in the slightest. Of course he'd only been after one thing, and anyone remotely female would have served his purpose. If she shut her eyes she could easily picture his face and the frank desire in it. She kept her eyes wide open. Jerk, she muttered. Worse than a jerk. He was going to be married for Hecate's sake. He was just another hound on the prowl. Besides, he had no way to find her. She'd seen the first and last of him at the airport, and that suited her just fine. The door opened, and a mousy woman sidled her way in. She glanced nervously around the interior, her stare freezing on the stuffed bats fixed to the ceiling. Dorinda moved, and the woman's focus darted to her. Love potions, she squeaked. Dorinda smiled broadly. Right this way. The two monkey pups squinted their heavily mascaraed eyes at the business card Roderick had given them, then handed it back. Right up the street, the boy said, pointing. His face had been powdered to a graveyard pallor, and he'd painted his lips a stark black. The girl had on less makeup but had dyed her hair pink. Both wore theatrical scowls and smelled like bean burritos. You can't miss it. Roderick thanked them brusquely and hurried up the walk. Colorful didn't begin to describe this place or the apes that populated it. He found it all too bright and sparkly, with building walls full of painted murals and mosaics, crafted from what appeared to be shattered pop bottles. In such a gaudy environment, small wonder the monkeys dressed to call attention to themselves. He wrinkled his nose at the abundance of leather, much of which clearly hadn't been laundered in ages. Vampire seemed to be the current fashion. Real vampires, Roderick surmised, probably shunned the area. One look at these apes in their faux Dracula garb, and the bats would kill themselves laughing. At least the pup had steered him right. The high-hatted witch mannequin out front drew his eye and him right to Dorinda Lowell's door. Like the business card set a spells display. Window was decorated with a crescent moon and stars. He tried to peer within, but saw only gloom. The sign on the door read open. He smiled and went inside. The moment he stepped through the doorway he sensed the presence of the enemy. He let the door fall shut behind him. His nose searched the room. He took a breath and sneezed explosively. The enemy responded with an ear-raking yowl. There on the sill crouched an orange tabby bristled up to about the size of a tiger. It flexed its claws and bared its teeth. He bared his own. The cat spat a hiss and Roderick snarled. They glowered challenge at each other. Finally the cat vaulted off the sill and streaked for the back of the shop. Its malevolent eyes, yellow as Lucifer's, glared out at him from the shadows. Oh hey, hi there. A bony blonde girl with a mannish haircut came out and rounded the counter. She shot a glance over her shoulder at the cat, which swore vehemently. Don't mind him. He scratch you. I didn't get close enough. No offense to you or your pet, but I don't get on with cats. Yeah, I noticed. She pursed her lips, then grinned up at him. British accent ticked off Kitty. You're Dorinda's werewolf, aren't you? He raised both brows. I see my reputation precedes me. You are? Perry. She thrust her hand at him. Not without trepidation he took it. Her nails were nearly as long as the cat's and painted periwinkle, with glitter. I guess you're here to see Dorinda. She'll be out in a minute. She's working some major magic. At the rear of the shop a toilet flushed. So did the girl. Tribute to the water gods, she said. She held onto his hand as if she expected something miraculous to happen. Apparently it didn't, because she let go with a little shrug and a wisp of disappointment on her face. I'll tell Dorinda you're here. Make yourself at home. She skipped toward the rear of the shop. On the way, she flipped a wall switch and the lights sprang on. Sorry for the gloomy. We're a magic shop. We've got a rep to uphold. She giggled and left him. A final hiss clawed him from the shadows in back. Then the scalding yellow eyes disappeared. He prowled around the shop. He'd never seen such a collection of junk, not even in Grandmama's attic. Candles by the gross. Herbs both dried and potted. Books with titles like Simple Enchantments and Necromancy for Dummies. Stone gargoyles in various sizes. Stuffed bats and globe lights hanging from the ceiling. An entire wall devoted to wizarding robes, long glittery gowns and skimpy studded leather pieces along with makeup in garish colors, silver jewelry and accessories. That explained where the cubs on the street had gotten their ludicrous costumes. In short, it carried the type of paraphernalia an ignorant monkey would imagine a witch would need. However, not all of it was trash. She had a healthy stock of basil on those shelves. Vampires liked to flavor their blood with basil when they couldn't get fresh. Not all the books were recent vintage paperbacks. Some of the more tattered volumes had titles in Latin and Greek. That gargoyle in the corner wasn't pockmarked cement. It was mummified. He suspected she kept an entirely different inventory in back for after-hours customers. Such shops existed in England and had for centuries. They popped into temporary existence down a side street, peddled their wares for a brief span, then moved on. They were usually run by Bulgarians and always smelled faintly of cheese. Nothing cheesy about this place beyond certain items of merchandise. It had its own unique scent to it. Magic perhaps. Definitely hers. One deep breath and he could practically feel her hair between his fingers, taste her skin on his tongue. She had set her stamp on this venture, marked it with her personality. A smile of satisfaction bloomed on his lips. Territoriality was a trait a wolf could appreciate. He paused to inspect a terrarium in a corner, angled to catch every last ray of sunlight. The tank held a foot-long lizard that looked like a mutant iguana. The ghastly thing flicked a purple tongue at him and hissed in mild annoyance. Don't mind Norman. He's basically harmless. Aha, the witch. If she thought she could intimidate him out of her life at this point with only an arch glare, she was sadly mistaken. Here in her shop, away from that smoke she'd conjured at the airport, he could get a better handle on her scent. It held a tang no mere ape could lay claim to. The spiciness made his mouth water. Mr. Chase, she started. Roderick. He bared his teeth in a charming smile, tightened a bit at the corners. That beastly cat isn't yours, is it? Springsteen? No, he's Perry's. My familiar is Stormin' Norman there. She nodded at the tank. He glanced within. The lizard blinked languidly back at him, upper and lower lids oozing together. Not your average sort of familiar, is he? Shows what you know. Norman's a dragon. Indeed. He took a closer look. The lizard remained unperturbed. Bit small. For a dragon, Roderick remarked. They only grow as big as their tank. If I kept him in the tub he'd be larger. No wings. Not on that breed. Good thing, or he'd be buzzing all over the store. Other than the cost for fire insurance, he's pretty low maintenance. Of course she was joking. The thing was a prop for the monkeys. A monitor lizard with glued-on spines and eyebrows. It munched placidly on a leaf of romaine. In a corner of the terrarium lay a glob of raw chicken, and what appeared to be charcoal briquettes. Roderick turned his back to the tank. He wasn't here for lizards. If you say so. At any rate, I've the afternoon free. I thought you might be interested in. Let's cut to the chase. Tipped off by Perry, Dorinda had time to plan her attack. She hadn't counted on those yellow eyes. They hit her like a sledgehammer and sent shockwaves down to her, generated by ABC Amber Lit. http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html. Nikes. Even in khakis and a pullover sweater there was no mistaking his breed, or his sheer masculinity, or his intentions. Wolves were short on subtlety and direct in what they wanted. And this one wanted. She stiffened her shoulders. It didn't matter what he wanted. He wasn't going to get. She summoned her power, cloaked it about her, and had the satisfaction of watching that smug lupin grin of his falter. He recovered swiftly with no drop in the wanting. Pig-headed also fit the word description. I won't even ask how you found me, she went on. We both know why you're really here. It isn't going to happen. That infuriating smirk returned. No. No, she folded her arms across her chest. I know a wolf on the prowl when he barges into my shop. Of any species. We can dispense with the awkward chit-chat then. I invite you to lunch, you say yes, we discover how attracted we are to each other, and afterwards. She held up her hand. The air in front of him suddenly took on gelid solidity. He tested it with the flat of his palm. It had a bit of give but turned stiff. At resistance. He could move in any direction except toward Dorinda. This only delays the inevitable, you know, he informed her. You want me? Can smell it on you. That's my bath oil. I don't waste time on married men or soon-to-be married men. You want a last fling, look elsewhere. His eyes thinned. Word travels fast. I'm a witch. We have ways of finding things out. We also honor oaths our own. And others. I won't help you betray your mate's trust with an hour of empty sex. It wouldn't be empty. Or only an hour. No means no, Wolfie. So if that's all you're here for. She extended her arm. The air shield crowded against him, forcing him backward. Toward the door. Wait. Typical Wolf, he didn't plan on going out without a fight. That's not the only reason I'm here. I came for. His desperate gaze scoured the shop's interior and hit on the sign by the register. A reading. I came for a reading. Sure you did. Yes. I admit it, I'm here to be mated. I want to know how it turns out. Will we get on? How many pups will we have? Will our pack prosper? That sort of thing. He was lying, of course. You just couldn't trust a wolf in a pullover sweater. No matter how sexy he looked in it. Her resolve wavered, and so did her shield. Instantly Roderick dug in his heels and stood fast. Dorinda sighed and dispersed her shield. Okay, you get a reading. Then you leave. For now. For good. Roderick shrugged. He took out his wallet and pulled out a wad of American currency, 3 times what the sign said she charged. Enough. Sufficient. Dorinda went behind the counter before he could swoop down on her. He strolled over and laid the money on the counter. She didn't look at it or touch it. Same for him, though she could feel the heat of his stare on her. She reached into the shoebox and scooped up the cards, shook them together and shuffled. Try not to be upset if the news isn't good. I have no control over what the cards tell me. He eyed the cards, suspicious. Is that a poker deck? Would you rather have tarot? I can do either. No, this will do. He smiled widely and leaned his hip against the counter. It's certainly different. What do I do? Dorinda shuffled, cut the deck and fanned it. Pick a card. Seriously. The card you select will represent you. The reading builds around it. Hecate's bra, she was sweating. She felt a sudden chilly sense of foreboding which card would end up in his hand. He made an exaggerated show of plucking just the right card. He held it up before his eyes, its back to her, and peered at her over the top of it. Doi. Put it back in the deck. No, down on the counter, face up. She closed her eyes and listened to the whisper of pasteboard landing on wood. His breathing was another whisper. Steady and expectant. Her own breath she held in her lungs. She cracked her lids a smidge and peeked at the card. King of Spades. At her stifled moan, Roderick leaned over the counter, dangerously close to her. He actually sounded worried. Is it bad? No. Of course it isn't. It's just your card. She shoved him back in briskly. Dealt the next card off the top. She caught the flash of red but couldn't stop herself. The Queen of Hearts landed on the counter beside the King of Spades. Oh crap. That means what? Roderick prompted. Love, she said, her voice only a little strained. You're made to be. That must be it, of course. This was Roderick's reading, not her own. The Queen could represent anyone. Let's see where it goes. It went to 3 diamonds in a row. King and Queen linked together on life's journey. Then the trouble started in the form of the 2 of clubs. The 2 of spades followed. That's not good. Why not? Clubs mean difficulty and spades mean change. Sometimes drastic change. You and your mate are joined together, but it won't be happy. Not at first. He sighed in resignation. I didn't imagine it would be. Getting cold paws? Sounds like it's a little late for that. Is she? I've no idea what she is. I've never met the girl. Dorinda froze in the act of dealing. Excuse me. I said we've never met. We've spoken on the phone and I've seen photos of her, but that's it. This is a political union arranged by my pack leader. Neither of us had any say in the matter. Aha. Dorinda tapped the back of the card with her fingernail. No offense, but does your pack know what century we're living in? No offense to you, but you've no idea of the complexity of wolf society. How regimented we are. The alpha barks you jump or else you're out of the pack. A lone wolf doesn't survive long. His expressive lips twisted. You've no idea how much I envy you monkeys, excuse me you humans, I mean, land of the free. How I wish. Dorinda saw it all. Young, ambitious alpha male chafing under the rule of a pack leader. That explained his atrocious behavior, although it didn't excuse it. A word of advice? Picking up women right before you get married isn't going to help anything. Well, it's not as if I'll be able to afterwards, is it? Might as well have my fun while I can. She bit down on her heated retort. Among the Wers, marriage was sacrosanct. They made it for life and never strayed. She knew that much about them. Let's finish up the reading, she said briskly. Who knows, maybe it'll get better. It didn't. It got worse. The Jack of Clubs came up next, an indication of serious trouble ahead. Better yet, Roderick said. Rather than respond, she laid down the next card. Her heart stopped. Ace of Spades. You're since gone sour, Roderick informed her. I know that isn't good. She raised her cobalt eyes to meet his. Your life is in danger. Heck it is tits. First love then mortal peril. The whole cliched kettle of fish. He looked as if he might have laughed it off, but his nose kept twitching. From what source? Let's see if it will tell us. She dealt the next 3 cards. Diamond. Spade diamond. The link, she said, pointing out the diamonds. Looks like it's personal. Someone close to you wants you dead. That fiancé you've never met. Or my entire immediate family. So tell me. He gestured at the cards, not quite as carelessly as she was sure he'd intended. Do they succeed? Doggedly she laid out the rest of the reading. Black predominated. All at once. The Ace of Hearts broke through, one last surge of love against the dark. The final card was the non-committal 5 of diamonds. She could read no resolution from it. Roderick had been leaning ever closer over the counter. He was practically in her lap. Well, what happens? Do I survive the wedding? I can't tell. Everything's up in the air. The future's never set in stone. Abruptly she swept the whole deal off the counter and into the box underneath. She shoved Roderick's payment back at him. It doesn't mean a thing. They're only cards. And all that sweat on your forehead and fear stinking your odor doesn't mean anything either. He was so close she could smell him. He smelled like fresh mown grass, as if he'd rolled in it. She wanted to back off but couldn't move. When she dared to look up, she found his lips only inches from hers. Do yourself a favor, she said. Be careful. Always, he murmured and leaned in. The door crashed open and an elderly woman charged in, loaded for bear. There you are. Her white-hot glare hit Roderick square between the yellow eyes. The woman's eyes were also yellow, Dorinda saw. Maybe not loaded for bear. Maybe loaded for wandering wolf. The nerve of you. Running out on Nora Duquesne like that. Do you know the time I had tracking you? If you hadn't mentioned South Street last night. She spotted Dorinda. And her snarl switched targets. Oh, I see. That's it, puppy. It's the leash for you. I ought to shut you up in a kennel. Until the wedding's done. It's nothing like that. Roderick hopped off the counter and put equal distance between himself and the women. That didn't stop the older one from striding up to him and landing a cuff on his neck. Ow! Will you stop? He came here for a reading, Dorinda said and indicated the sign. I invited him about his upcoming wedding. He wanted to know if everything works out. Oh! The woman thinned her eyes at the both of them in a pull the other one. The woman sniffed it suspiciously. What's this? Hand and the women shook. Charles swears by you. I must say you're fleet. Again. Confrontation moved beyond her eye and earshot, and no way was she going to experience watching his back. He'd be fine. Although tonight she'd light a. Now.
Amber-LIT converté.
http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html Shook his hand. Too bad, you're right, he is a hunk. Lucky her, whoever his. Chapter 4. The club wasn't bad for a Fong bar. Noisy of course, but not excessively so. Not as many monkeys as he'd feared. Costumes were a bit more restrained than on South Street. The interior reeked of basil, simian sweat, desperation and overexcitement. Just the sort of place Gormy Eugene would pick to hold a family get-together. Place is slow tonight, Eugene remarked in an irritated tone as if this were a bad thing. They had a table just off the main aisle, just small enough for Roderick to feel cramped. His cousins ringed him hyperactive Eugene cool. Lucy quiet little teenaged Emma. Charlie was on duty and wouldn't be joining them. Lorraine, next eldest after Charlie, had married since Roderick had seen her last, and now lived with her mate's pack in New Jersey. He wondered if Eugene had dared bring her here for her last night as a lone wolf. Hang in there, Rod. Eugene clapped him on the back. After midnight we'll head home and have a run. We might even scare up some game, but don't hold me to that. The park's overrun by coyotes these days, and you know how they are. He didn't, having never met a coyote, but the thought of a good long run in wolf form made his limbs ache with yearning. He sipped his drink, a frothy concoction heavy on the goat's blood, and politely generated by ABC Amber.
LIT.RT.
http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html shook his head at the ape girl trying to entice him to dance. Eugene claimed her instead. Roderick watched them move onto the dance floor and engage in jerky movements that resembled a three-legged dog attempting a hump. He didn't watch for long. He tried to make small talk with Lucy and Emma. His cousins remained polite, but reserved, intimidated by his alpha presence. When a couple of were boys came to their table and nervously asked them, through him, for a dance, Roderick wasn't sure who was more relieved. He nodded permission, and the girls gratefully made their escape. For a time he watched the staff at work. 2 wolves and a Japanese fox tended bar. They doled out straight liquor to the apes but kept a separate list of blood-based, non-alcoholic drinks for their real clientele, the steady stream of vampires who drifted in and out. Their noses told them who was who, monkey or bat. An efficient system. Lycaon bite it, what was wrong with him? The apes with Eugene was comely enough. 2 days ago he'd have moved on her without a second thought. He wasn't one to think too deeply with a she involved. That was then. Now had become downright uncomfortable. He growled and downed a stiff gulp of his drink. Face facts, he'd quite lost his taste for casual romp since he got Dorinda's scent in his nose. The witch must have put a spell on him. This restlessness, these thoughts were all her fault. He glanced around the dank interior. Eugene and the monkey had finished their dance, or whatever you wanted to call it. The girl had disappeared. Eugene was attempting, with little success, to chat up a disinterested bat. Lucy and Emma giggled at the bar while their conquests bought them drinks. No age restrictions on service, as Wers could not stomach alcohol. The wolf lads appeared harmless enough, and Lucy would look after her sister. Bugger Eugene. No one would miss him, Roderick decided, if he stepped outside. For a bit. Free of the Fong bar. He stood on the pavement and sucked in the brisk night air. It made a sorry statement indeed that a city's grimy air outranked the clubs. At least the street had decent circulation. He took in a long breath, slowly, through his nose, and let it sigh out again with only a little cough. Tomorrow night he would meet his intended. After that, his days of freedom would be numbered. Mother wanted this transaction wrapped up quickly. Tighten up the choke collar, cut off his air completely. He supposed he could always slip the collar, abandon the family, run lone, and die or go mad, cut off from pack support. He could have challenged Bernadette. But what good would that do? Even if he won, he'd still have to marry, because the family would never accept an alpha of his age without a she and the promise of pups. Check and literal mate. You had to hand it to the queen mom. She always covered all the angles.
No.
Doubt the reason she'd remained alpha so long. That skipped his thoughts back to Dorinda. She'd faced him down when he'd
Corneret her in herden.
confident, eye straight to eye, not an inch of give. Now that was an alpha. Think of how magnificent she would be in bed. He sighed. If only she'd been were lost in hopeless fantasies. At first he didn't notice the scruffy pair in battered denim creeping up on him. Their primate stench alerted him. He whirled on them abruptly, and they froze. They were done up in vampire leathers, their faces painted like kabuki actors. Headed for the club, no doubt. He stepped away from the entrance, but they kept coming toward him. Why, he couldn't fathom. Can I help you with something? He asked. The male opened his mouth, then hesitated. Sweat poured off him like a cataract. The sullen female shouldered him aside. Her dirty blonde hair was streaked with purple. She stood with her hands thrust into her coat's baggy pockets and her eyes thin to slits. You Roderick Chase? She demanded. He raised a brow. Yes. How did you? Told you, she said to her partner. She yanked a knife from her pocket and lunged at him. Sheer dumbfoundment rooted him in place. She thrust her blade directly into his unprotected chest, right for his heart. Except the knife seemed to hit something that wasn't him. Skidded right over his sweater without even leaving a crease. The girl's eyes widened, but she didn't lose her pluck. She took a blunt jab at his neck. Given her proximity, she couldn't possibly miss, yet somehow she did. The blade whispered right around his neck without even touching the skin. This time the both of them gaped at the knife. What the hell? The girl blurted. What did I tell you? He's a werewolf. You gotta use silver. The male charged in to try his luck. His knife belonged to the butcher family, with a tarnished patina on the blade. In addition, he wielded a length of chain, not silver but nonetheless deadly. No need for resistance with the likes of this. Roderick simply sidestepped and stuck out his foot. The male belly flopped on the pavement with a painful sounding thud. Both knife and chain went skidding into the gutter. That left him only the stupefied female to deal with. Roderick seized her wrist and twisted. Her knife clattered on the cement. He opened his mouth to question her. She stared up at him and screamed. Oh bugger. Of course it was the teeth, long and getting longer by the second. The change was a common enough response to mortal danger, automatic. Instinctive. Just not what he wanted right now. Not only couldn't he interrogate his attackers without a human voice, he'd had no time to shed his clothes. To the girl's shrieks were added the immensely painful ripping noises of a perfectly good pair of trousers shredding off his werewolf body. He also lost his grip on the girl, as paws aren't made for grasping. She backed off frantically as he pitched forward to land on all fours. There went the seams on his pullover. By Lycan, these murderous monkeys were going to pay for this. He shook off the rags that had been his outfit and bared his fangs at the girl. Yes, you'd better scream, you sodding ape. Damn his tail, where was Eugene? At this point the primate was terrified enough to generate it by ABC.
Amberelite.rt
http://www.processtext.com/upclit.html http://www.processtext.com/upclit.html Babble all the answers he wanted. Once she realized he couldn't do worse than snarl at her, they could bid cooperation goodbye. Something whistled over his head. He'd all but forgotten the male. The monkey had abandoned his knife in favor of the chain. A landed blow would be damaging, but none of the blows landed. Granted they were monkeys, but could even apes be so incompetent? Enough of this. He needed only one to question. He eyed the male's crotch and licked his muzzle. The baboon took the hint. No amount of money's worth this, he said, dropped the chain and fled. That left the girl crab-scrabbling away from him and screaming her painted face off. Their performance had drawn quite an audience with their pointed fingers and cell phone cameras. Not what he, both a were and a foreigner, needed. He caught the girl's shirt in his jaws and dragged her toward the Fong bar. He suspected it wouldn't be the first time some wolf or bat had hauled a struggling victim inside. It seemed a workable plan, shattered like the bullet that struck the doorjamb. Just above his head, Roderick dropped the girl and stared about. Another bullet pinged off the sidewalk just short of his right forepaw. The gathering crowd added their screams to the girls. There. The beat-up Chevrolet across the street. The one with the rifle barrel poking out the window. He scented gunpowder and exhaust but couldn't get a fix on the gunman. It might be a monkey, it might be a bat, it might be one of his own. A third shot parted the fur on his shoulders. The man in the car cursed viciously. Like the chain and the knives, the bullets couldn't seem to hit their target. No sense in pushing his luck. Roderick whirled and bolted. Shots followed him up the block. He plunged across the street. Brakes squealed. And drivers cursed. Pedestrians scattered. Sirens wailed in his direction, and he flattened his ears against their shrillness. He ran flat out for several blocks until noise and panic faded with distance. Eventually he slowed to a trot, then a complete stop. He stood panting, ears back and tail at an uncertain angle, and took stock. He had no idea where he was. All right, think it through. The Fong Bar was on Arch Street near Chinatown. Eugene had said so, which meant next to nothing to Roderick. He could trail himself to the Fong Bar, although, judging by the scream of converging sirens, that probably wasn't the best of options at the moment. He had no clue how to return to Fairmount Park, and couldn't ask directions in this form. His other form now had no clothing. He imagined the prudish monkey authorities would take a dim view of that. They'd known his name. They'd known he was Wer. They'd confirmed his identity before they attacked him, and they'd come at him to kill. His first day in the city of brotherly love. Growling under his breath, Roderick began walking. Luckily, this part of this blighted city was nearly free of pedestrians. The few apes he encountered and sidled around paid him little attention beyond snap fingers and here doggy. Nobody seemed upset by the sirens, or the sight of a wolf on the street. Life in the big city, as Eugene no doubt would put it. Then, like a ray of sunlight bursting through fog, he caught a whiff of grass and trees. Eagerly he loped in that direction. He spotted the outline of Independence Hall and breathed a whine of relief. The only spot in this ape-infested jungle he was familiar with. He couldn't find his way back to Aunt Letty's from here, but he could make it to South Street. He oriented himself on 5th and broke into a trot. After dark, Seta Spell's mortal trade slowed to a trickle, and Dorinda's real customers came in. After 5 years of serving an otherworldly clientele, she thought she'd seen it all, but a vampire with a broken fang was new. This happened how? She asked him. Beninu muff, the vamp said around his hand and her fingers. She dabbed a bit of gel on the stump. Oof, what a doinf. He got punched in the mouth. The vampire's androgynous human companion. Translated. The Vic had a set of brass knuckles. He looked like an accountant. Who knew? Dorinda sked while she smeared gel. This will regenerate, you know. When you wake up tomorrow night it'll be good as new. Hurt now, the vamp complained. She took her hand away. Still. The vampire considered. No. Not anymore. Thanks. Good. Like I said, it'll regenerate by tomorrow. And don't lick it. The vamp guiltily tucked his tongue back into his mouth. Dorinda shook a handful of white pills into a packet. Calcium, she said. Toughen up the dentin. You wouldn't happen to carry blood, would you? Miss Dinner. I don't do the dark arts. Try Schumann's face. From a Vic. What's the world coming to? Got a werewolf out here. Dorinda came to attention. What's he doing? He's scratching on the door. Now he's trying to work the knob with his teeth. He's got his nerve, Dorinda thought with a huff. Of course it would be Chase. Couldn't he take a hint? Herself. The wolf ducked inside. Thrill of fear. Her vision at the airport hadn't done him justice. In wolf form he was enormous, with rich black fur and a huge brush of a tail. His form. Recoil. This was no simple wolf, said those eyes. This was a lord of the frightened peasants cowering in their huts, that Irish wolfhounds had been bred to kill. He still radiated dangerous power. He was still covered in black hair. And he was still enormous. While Roderick withered the vampire's boyfriend with a glower, Dorinda was able to compose herself. Not so often, though, her inner self admitted. And this one was a naked. The gate shut on it and met Roderick's eyes. Maintaining her eye line proved. Tried to kill me. Oh, poor baby. Who'd do such a thing? The vampire's boyfriend gushed. You. Let's go, the vamp snarled. He grabbed his companion's arm and propelled him. Yes, I'm sodding sure. Somebody shoots a rifle at you, it's hard to mistake their intentions. And grabbed a wizard's robe. Here. Put this on. I'm not, oh, of course. He shrugged into the robe. One forgets propriety. No, they missed. Repeatedly. Which is odd. He stopped. His expression darkened. Where's the cat?
Elle était coinrtée.
http://www.processtext.com/upclit html http://www.processtext.com/upclit html. Unfortunately, Nightsiders getting shot at wasn't new to her. She kept returned with a mug of steaming beef broth, a worse equivalent of a hot cup. From delayed reaction, he angled his body so she wouldn't see, and she. Quietly, Dorinda went to the door and turned the hanging sign from open to closed. She returned to the counter and leaned against it. Tell me what? I already have. Somebody tried to kill me. Knives as well as guns. He peered. Robbery. They established my identity before they attacked. Called me by name. They knew not usually. So this was a hit. Was it other worse? Vampires. I couldn't catch his scent. He polished off the broth. Life in danger. You. Dorinda indicated the wall phone behind him. You want to call Charlie or... He barely glanced at the phone. His mouth was tight, his eyes cold as a winter. Big Alex knows, she reminded him. He could have ordered this as a warning. Him off. Is he in the habit of employing apes to do his dirty work? Roderick set his empty mug aside. So it's family. You were right. Someone in. The family wants me gone. The marriage. Maybe she has a human boyfriend with serious objections. When Roderick still didn't reach for the phone, she headed for it herself. Her heart stuttered at his touch. She forced herself to ignore it and overlook his automatic we. He's a cop. Of the politics. Rank shifting's as natural to us as changing shape. It goes on constantly. Even for someone like Charlie. Must explain why they waited until now. He went on, more to himself. Isolate me in a foreign land, then go for the throat. You're right, it probably isn't Charlie. It's more likely Mother or Tamra. Carefully Dorinda pried his hand off her wrist. Who'd benefit from your death? Lower ranks could advance. You need suspects? Let me list my relatives. We haven't even gotten to my betrothed's family, or your Big Alex. That doesn't leave you too many options. He slanted a calculating look up at her. There's you. No, there isn't. Cruiser had pulled up to the curb just outside the shop. The chair scraped. Back as Roderick stood. Cousin Charlie. Saves us a call. Dorinda trotted to the door and opened it just as Charlie's. Rod. Lycan, this is a stroke of luck. Charlie Meadows was a tall, trim wolf. With chestnut hair and a thick mustache. Eugene called me, told me what went down at the club. Why the hell didn't you call somebody? Mom's going scatty. Roderick opened the wizard's robe. I seem to have misplaced my cell. Hoping maybe you could track him, but I see you're way ahead. Now. He advanced on Roderick, all cop. You want to fill me in? I couldn't get scat out of Eugene. Chapter 5. Adventures. Dorinda learned some additional facts and noted the ones he left out, such as his attacker's awareness of his name and species. Fortunately, he finished up. I was able to find my way here. I was just about to call Aunt Letty. Sorry for the delay. Any idea who they were or why they went for you? Roderick shrugged. They were monkeys. Who knows why monkeys do anything? Probably a robbery. Kids after dope money. Speaking of which, Charlie pulled a leather wallet from his pocket and tossed it to Roderick. We recovered it from in front of the bar. You'll have to tell me if anything's missing. Looks like the money's intact. He riffled through the wallet. Were my assailants still there when you arrived? Are they ever? Of course not. Probably took off when you turned into a wolf. Right in front of them. I realize you were under duress, but Lycan's guts. Rod, this isn't Chase Manor. We don't do that in public here. The humans are already leery of us. We don't need any more bad press. I'll try to remember that next time I'm shot at. Yeah. Charlie sighed. Saudi. He glanced to Dorinda. He'll never tell me. So I'll ask you, was he hurt? Not that I could see. And she'd seen everything. The memory made her quiver. Inside. Mind out of the gutter, she ordered herself. Yes, that's the strange bit, Roderick said. I can understand how the shooter would miss. Cars whizzing back and forth in the street and all that. But the girl had me dead. Twice. And she missed both times. Same for the other's chain. Nothing could touch me. The weapons bounced off? Dorinda said. Like they'd hit a force field or something. More like slid around. It was awfully odd. Dorinda nodded. I think I know what happened. When you approached me at the airport, did you notice anything unusual? Any strange sensations or visions? Well, when I first saw you, my heart sped up. He smiled disarmingly. She didn't smile back. He let the smile and the charm both drop. Now that you mention it, I recall the color violet of all things, and feeling full like, after a big meal. Feeling great, Aunt Sophia. That was it. His mind leapt to a pack gathering in the deep forest back when he'd been a small cub. He'd been drowsing in Great Aunt Sophia's lap, full-fed and secure. Great Aunt Sophia wore her favorite violet dress. Safe, he concluded. I felt safe. That must be it then, Dorinda said to Charlie. My brother was flying back to Chicago. I put a protection spell on his plane. Roderick came up to me while I was at it. He must have gotten caught in its sphere. And it's still operating? Charlie said doubtfully. After over a day? It was a big plane. I cast a potent spell. It should fade by morning. Protection spells are always temporary. I can give you a charm to improve your luck, but that's the best I can do. Why? Charlie pounced. You think these people will try again? Should she mention the reading? She glanced at Roderick. His expression begged her to keep quiet. Maybe not them specifically, she said carefully. Let me get you an amulet. Couldn't hurt. Yeah, okay. She could tell Charlie had his suspicions both as a wolf and a cop. But without cooperation he had to let it drop. Like and bite it this. Better not be targeting. Rod, don't walk the streets alone for a while. There are places in the city even we stay out of and you don't know them yet. And no more shifting in public. The work community tries to keep a low profile. Big Alex's orders. I won't shift if they don't shoot. Oh, for. Charlie broke off at Dorinda's approach. She held a small pendant, a simple red stone on a thin bronze chain. She handed this to Roderick. For luck. Won't deflect a knife, but it might increase your chances. He bounced the pendant in his palm. It held a faint warmth, perhaps from her hand. Her scent washed over him. He shot a grin at her. So I'm going to get lucky. With an almost lupin growl she shoved Roderick toward Charlie. Take him home. Before I shoot him. The station first, Charlie said, taking Roderick's arm. I want a full, official account of what happened tonight. Humans, vampires, I don't care. Nobody jumps family and walks away clean. Thanks, Dorinda. For everything. You ever need help, just howl and we'll hear you. I'll send the rope back in the morning. He checked the street before he herded Roderick. Outside, the two climbed into his car. Dorinda watched them pull away. Roderick's smoldering stare was locked on the window and on her. She stepped back. She'd done all she could to protect him, all any which could do. It was up to him and his pack now. The same pack that might have just tried to kill him. Not my problem, she muttered to herself. If only she could get the memory of those piercing yellow eyes out of her head. Not my problem, she repeated. It sounded even shakier this time. Irritated at herself, she picked up Norman and cradled him, basking in his warmth. Wolves, she crooned to him. Let them chase their own tails, huh, baby? Norman sighed. So did Dorinda. Tonight wouldn't end fast enough. Dorinda was with a customer and so couldn't dash to the wall phone when it rang at mid-morning. She kept up her spiel on which herbs could do what and tried to look more chipper and wide awake than she felt. She'd closed the shop at 2 a.m. and gone home to a fitful sleep, full of dreams about wolves getting shot by gorillas. She thought about calling Charlie for an update but didn't want Roderick to hear about it. He didn't need any encouragement. Perry snagged the phone. Hey there. You've reached Set a Spell, purveyors of all things witchy. I'm Perry. What can I do for you? Who? She glanced over her shoulder at Dorinda and smirked. Darinder? She's with somebody. You want to hang on? Or leave a message? He must have picked message because Perry stayed on the phone but turned her back for privacy. Dorinda masked both a curse and a yawn and focused on her sales pitch. 10 minutes later, with a satisfied, herb-laden customer safely out the door, Dorinda steadied her voice and asked, Who was that on the phone? Like you don't know, Perry said with a maddening grin. That was your werewolf buddy. I said you'd call him back. I don't want to call him back. I think you should. I don't think he wants a date. He sounded all serious. Like. Dorinda came fully awake at once. He'd found something out. Did he leave a number on the pad? She didn't dial right off. Don't look too eager. Oh goddess. What was she? In high school. She stabbed in the number. The strain in Aunt Letty's answering voice wiped all the vexation out of her. Dorinda? Oh, thank you for calling. It's been so horrible. Poor Roddy's just beside himself. Is that her? Roderick came on the line. Dorinda, thank you for returning my call. I'll be blunt. I want to hire you. For what? I told you last night there's nothing more I can do. Protection. Spells work but only short term. I know you think it's a risk but really, you should confide in Charlie and let him. Not as a witch, Percy. I want to hire you as my body.